The smell never leaves. That's what they don't tell you when you're assigned to an armored regiment, when you're watching the propaganda reels showing gleaming Leman Russ battle tanks rolling victoriously across conquered terrain while stirring music plays and narrators speak of Imperial might and the Emperor's armored fist. They don't tell you about the smell. It's a combination you can't adequately describe to someone who hasn't experienced it. Promethium fumes mixing with human sweat confined in recycled air. Gun oil and spent propellant residue. The particular stench of overheated metal and stressed machinery. Ozone from electrical systems pushed beyond rated capacity. And underneath it all, the organic smell, fear, waste, blood, the bodily fluids that leak from crew members who die inside these metal coffins and can't be immediately removed because the battle continues, and stopping to extract corpses means dying yourself. You learn to live with the smell. Learn to eat your rations while breathing air that tastes like promethium and death. Learn to sleep in compartments saturated with odors that would make civilians vomit. Learn to function in an environment that assaults every sense while demanding absolute focus and precision. My name is Trooper Lena Morth. Gunner, second loader, sometimes driver, when our primary got injured or killed. Catachan 23rd Armored, attached to Crusade forces in the Segmentum Pacificus, fighting wars on worlds I couldn't locate on a chart, even when we were actively conquering them. I served in a Leman Russ Vanquisher designated Emperor's Retribution, hull number 7734M, part of 3rd Squadron, Charlie Company. The tank had been in service for 43 years before I was assigned to it, longer than I'd been alive, longer than most crew members survived, long enough to have its original components replaced multiple times while maintaining the same designation and machine spirit. The crew when I joined numbered 4. Commander Sergeant Drax, 20 years in armored service, face permanently marked by flash burns from a turret fire that killed his previous crew. Gunner Corporal Vin, thin and intense, who could calculate firing solutions faster than our targeting cogitator. Driver Trooper Hulst, muscular in the way you get from years of wrestling with tank controls that fight back. And Loader Trooper Kosef, who trained me during my first week and died during my second when a shell breached our armor and his body absorbed the shrapnel that would have killed the rest of us. I took his position, became the loader. The crew member whose job is mechanically simple: take shells from the rack, load them into the breach, repeat until the enemy is destroyed or you're dead. No complex calculations, no sophisticated targeting, no intricate driving. Just lift, load, repeat. Simple mechanically, brutally exhausting physically. A standard Leman Russ shell weighs approximately 20 kilograms. The high explosive rounds are slightly lighter. The armor-piercing rounds are heavier. The specialty munitions Phosphex, Melter, Plasma have their own unique weights and handling requirements. You're loading these shells in a confined space barely large enough for your body, reaching from the ammunition rack to the breech, performing the movement while the tank is in motion, while the floor lurches and shifts, while incoming fire rocks the hull, while the commander is screaming firing orders, and the gunner is cycling targets and the driver is trying to position for optimal firing angle. You're doing this for hours, sometimes for entire days during extended engagements. Lift, load, repeat. Lift, load, repeat. Your shoulders burn. Your back screams. Your hands bleed through your gloves from the rough metal edges of the shells. Your knees bruise from bracing against the hull as the tank moves. Your head pounds from the confined air and the constant noise and the repetitive concussion every time the main gun fires. And you can't stop, can't rest, can't slow down because the firing rate determines whether you kill the enemy before they kill you, whether you provide effective support to the infantry relying on your fire, whether you survive the engagement or become another casualty statistic. The training simulations don't prepare you. They teach you the mechanics, the safety protocols, the proper handling procedures. They drill you on shell types and loading sequences and emergency procedures. They make you practice until you can load blindfolded, until the movements become automatic, until you can maintain the firing rate even when exhausted. But simulations can't replicate the reality, can't replicate the heat. The interior of a Leman Russ, during extended combat, reaches temperatures that would be classified as industrial hazard in any civilian context. The main gun generates enormous thermal energy with each shot. The engine radiates heat through inadequate shielding. The electronics and control systems produce waste heat that has nowhere to dissipate. The confined space traps all of it, turning the crew compartment into an oven where the temperature climbs past 40 degrees, past 50, into ranges where prolonged exposure causes serious physiological damage. You're loading shells in this heat, wearing full uniform because armor regulations don't permit lighter clothing regardless of environmental conditions. Sweating through your underlayers, your uniform, your equipment webbing, losing fluid faster than you can replace it from the limited water supplies. Developing heat exhaustion that manifests as dizziness, nausea, disorientation, all symptoms you have to ignore because stopping means dying. Can't replicate the noise. The main gun firing generates sound pressure levels that cause permanent hearing damage despite the acoustic dampeners we wear. The engine roars constantly at decibel levels that make communication difficult, even through the internal vox. The ammunition feeding mechanisms clank and grind. The incoming fire shells impacting the armor. Las fire scorching the hull. Explosions near enough to rock the entire tank creates percussion that you feel in your chest, your bones, your teeth. You're loading shells in this noise. Responding to verbal commands you can barely hear over the din. Coordinating with crew members through hand signals and trained responses because actual conversation is impossible. Maintaining awareness of your surroundings through sound cues, the specific tone of the engine that indicates mechanical stress. The particular sound of incoming fire that suggests anti-armor weapons. The change in the main gun's report that means the barrel is overheating. Can't replicate the fear. The knowledge that you're inside a metal box that draws enemy fire like nothing else on the battlefield. That every anti-armor weapon in range is targeting you specifically. That the armor protecting you, thick as it is, blessed by tech priests, maintained according to Mechanicus specifications, can be penetrated by dedicated anti-tank weapons. That penetration means the interior of the tank becomes a killing zone, where shrapnel and superheated metal fragments ricochet through the crew compartment, shredding everyone inside. You're loading shells, while knowing that any moment could be the moment when enemy fire breaches the armor and you die. Not cleanly, not quickly, but messily torn apart by shrapnel, or burned by promethium ignition, or crushed by mechanical failure, or suffocated by internal fires that consume the oxygen faster than you can evacuate. The crew becomes your entire world. 4 people, sometimes 3 when casualties aren't immediately replaced, living in a space barely large enough for your bodies, depending absolutely on each other's performance, sharing every danger and hardship and moment of terror. You learn details about your crew members that you'd never know in normal military service. The specific sounds they make when breathing under stress. The particular way they curse when things go wrong. The private rituals they perform before battle, prayers, gestures, small superstitions that help them manage fear. The breaking points where exhaustion or fear or pain overcomes their discipline and you have to compensate for their reduced function. Sergeant Drax had nightmares. Not unusual, most combat veterans have nightmares. But Drax would sometimes wake screaming in the few hours we got to sleep between engagements, his screams echoing through the crew compartment, waking everyone, creating moments of shared trauma where we all remembered why we were having nightmares too. Corporal Vin was addicted to stimulants, not recreational, medicinal, prescribed by regimental Medicaid to help him maintain the intense focus required for accurate gunnery during extended engagements. But the dosages had been increasing over his years of service, and sometimes I'd catch him shaking when the stimulants wore off, his hands trembling too severely to perform fine motor control until the next dose kicked in. Trooper Halst talked to the tank constantly, whispered conversations with the machine spirit, asking it to hold together, to protect us, to function despite damage and stress, and the 1,000 small failures that accumulated over extended campaigns. The tank seemed to respond to him, or maybe he was just skilled enough to feel the machine's needs through the controls and interpret mechanical feedback as communication. And me? I was the new one. The replacement. The crew member who'd taken Kosev's position, and therefore reminded everyone that crew positions were temporary, that any of us could die and be replaced, that we were all fundamentally expendable components in the tank's continued operation. They didn't trust me at first. Trust has to be earned in armored regiments, earned through performance under fire, through demonstrated competence, through proving you won't freeze or panic or fail when the tank needs you to function. I earned it during our third engagement after I'd joined the crew. We were providing fire support for an infantry advance across open terrain standard armored doctrine, tanks moving in coordinated formation, suppressing enemy positions while guard infantry assaulted. The engagement was proceeding normally until enemy anti-armor teams appeared in positions our reconnaissance hadn't identified. The first indication was Sergeant Drax screaming, "Brace!" a half-second before an anti-tank missile impacted our left track assembly. The explosion was catastrophic, not enough to penetrate the main armor, but sufficient to destroy the track, damage the drive wheel, and immobilize the tank. We went from moving at combat speed to dead stop in less than a second, the deceleration throwing me against the ammunition rack hard enough to crack ribs. Immobilized tank in open terrain under enemy fire. One of the worst tactical situations in armored warfare. We couldn't maneuver, couldn't retreat, could only sit and absorb fire, while hoping our armor held long enough for recovery vehicles to reach us or enemy anti-armor teams to be eliminated. Drax was already calling for support over the squadron vox, reporting our status, requesting covering fire. Vin was engaging targets, the main gun tracking, and firing at identified anti-armor positions. Halst was trying to assess damage, determine if we could restore any mobility through emergency repairs, and I was loading. Lift, load, repeat. Maintaining the firing rate because our survival depended on suppressing the enemy positions before they could line up killing shots on our immobilized hull. The second missile hit our turret. The impact was different, sharper, more penetrative. The kind of hit that suggested armor-piercing warhead rather than high explosive. The turret ring jammed, frozen in position, our main gun locked, pointing at whatever angle it had been at when the missile struck. We'd lost mobility and turret traverse, could only fire at targets directly in our limited firing arc. We're effectively a static pillbox waiting for enemy forces to maneuver into positions we couldn't engage. Drax made the decision. Abandon tank. Emergency evacuation. Move. We drilled emergency evacuation procedures until they were automatic. The sequence was simple: cease fire, secure ammunition, pop hatches, evacuate in designated order, take defensive positions around the hull. Simple in theory. Complicated when you're under fire. Halst went first. Driver exits through forward hatch, provides covering fire, while rest of crew evacuates. He made it out, took position behind the tank's bulk, started firing his las gun at enemy positions. Vin went second. Gunner exits through turret hatch. He was halfway out when a last round caught him in the shoulder, the impact spinning him and dropping him back into the crew compartment. Not dead, but wounded badly enough that he couldn't complete evacuation without assistance, which left me and Drax. I was supposed to evacuate third, Drax as commander last, but Vin was blocking the turret hatch, wounded and semi-conscious, and we had maybe seconds before the tank took another hit that might penetrate the main armor and kill everyone still inside. I grabbed Vin, hauled him upright through pure adrenaline, shoved him toward the hatch while Drax pulled from above. We got him out, got him to cover, and I was climbing through the hatch when the third missile hit. The impact caught the turret directly. The armor held barely, but the internal shock was enormous. I felt it through the metal, felt the whole tank ring like a struck bell, felt something in the turret mechanism give way with a sound like breaking bones. I was hanging halfway out of the hatch when the ammunition rack ignited. Not a full explosion if that had happened. I wouldn't be here to describe it. But a partial ignition, a cook-off of damaged shells, enough to turn the crew compartment into a blast furnace. Drax grabbed me, hauled me the rest of the way out with strength I didn't know he possessed, pulled me clear, and threw me behind cover as the tank's interior became an inferno. I lay there gasping, my uniform smoking from heat exposure, my hands burned from touching superheated metal during evacuation. Vin was bleeding out next to me. Halst was still firing at enemy positions. Drax was on the Vox calling for immediate Medicae support, and Emperor's Retribution was burning. Flames visible through the hatches, internal ammunition continuing to cook off, the machine spirit dying as fire consumed the systems we'd maintained and blessed and relied on. We'd lost the tank, lost our home, our protection, our primary weapon, were reduced to 4 infantry with small arms, pinned in open terrain, under fire from enemies we couldn't effectively engage. The recovery came 20 minutes later, other tanks from our squadron suppressing enemy positions, Chimera transports extracting us, Medicae personnel stabilizing Vin's wounds. We survived because our squadron responded, because we'd trained for this scenario, because armored doctrine included provisions for rescuing immobilized crews. But Emperor's Retribution was gone, burned out, total loss. The hull would be recovered eventually, assessed for salvage, either repaired and returned to service, or scrapped for components. Our crew was broken up. Vin was evacuated to regimental Medicae for extended treatment. Halst was reassigned to a different tank in our squadron. Drax received new crew members and a new tank, and I was transferred to Unbreakable Faith, hull number 8821M, assigned as loader to a crew I didn't know, in a tank whose machine spirit was unfamiliar, starting the whole process over. That's the reality of armored service. You're not assigned to a regiment or a company. You're assigned to a specific tank with a specific crew. That tank becomes your home, your weapon, your protection, your identity. You learn its quirks, its mechanical personality, the specific ways its machine spirit manifests. You perform the maintenance rituals that keep it functioning. You name it, bless it, pray to it, and for it, and then you lose it. Through enemy action, or mechanical failure, or command reassignment, and you're transferred to a new tank with a new crew, and you start over, building the trust and knowledge and relationship that armored service requires. I served in 4 different tanks over 3 years. Emperor's Retribution burned. Unbreakable Faith was destroyed by artillery direct hit on the ammunition storage. Total loss, entire crew killed, except me, because I'd been outside the tank performing maintenance. Righteous Fury was immobilized during a river crossing, sank in 12 meters of water, the crew drowning inside when we couldn't open the hatches against water pressure. Each loss was trauma. Each new assignment was starting over. Each crew was learning to trust new members while mourning the ones who died. The infantry doesn't understand what armored service costs. They see tanks as mobile cover, as fire support, as armored assets that operate according to tactical plans. They don't see the crews inside the people who live in those metal boxes, who breathe the toxic air and endure the heat, and perform the exhausting physical labor that keeps the tanks functioning. They don't see us loading shells until our shoulders give out. Don't see us performing maintenance in the field, replacing damaged components with inadequate tools and limited supplies, conducting repairs that Mechanicus tech priests would condemn as heretical field expedient solutions. Don't see us sleeping in the crew compartment when we're too far forward for proper billeting, lying on metal surfaces that are too hot or too cold, sharing space with ammunition and equipment, and the persistent smell of promethium and death. They don't see us dying. Not in glorious combat, not in heroic last stands, but in mundane mechanical failures, crushed by hatches that malfunction and close on crew members, burned by promethium leaks that ignite from electrical sparks, suffocated by engine exhaust that floods crew compartments when ventilation fails, killed by our own tanks more often than by enemy fire. The casualty rates in armored regiments exceed infantry in most campaigns. Not because we engage in more combat, though we do, but because the nature of armored warfare is inherently lethal. Tanks draw concentrated anti-armor fire. Tank crews can't take cover, can't dig in, can't disperse when under bombardment. We're locked inside our vehicles, dependent on armor that can always be penetrated by sufficiently powerful weapons, serving machines that can fail catastrophically at any moment. The average service life for an armored crew member in active combat is measured in months, not years. Months. I survived 3 years through combination of skill, luck, and willingness to perform tasks that killed other people. I learned to read the sounds that indicated imminent mechanical failure, learned to feel through the tank's movements when we were on terrain that would immobilize us, learned to identify anti-armor threats before they achieved firing solutions, learned when to stay with the tank and when to evacuate, when to trust the armor and when to abandon it. But mostly I survived through luck. Pure, random, inexplicable luck that meant I was outside the tank when it was hit, or positioned wrong for shrapnel to hit me, or evacuating through a hatch that didn't jam when others did. My 4th tank was Adamant Defender, hull number 9103M. The crew was professional, experienced, disciplined. Commander Lieutenant Cross, who'd survived 5 years in armored service ancient by regimental standards. Gunner Corporal Thane, precise and methodical, who maintained perfect firing records. Driver Trooper Mech, who treated the tank like it was sapient and deserving of respect. We functioned well together, achieved high-performance metrics in training and exercises, received commendations for actions during several engagements, built the trust and coordination that made armored crews effective, and then we were deployed to Vandisfor for what command described as routine pacification operations against minimal resistance. The briefing was wrong, the intelligence was wrong, the entire operational premise was wrong. We landed expecting light resistance from poorly equipped insurgents. We encountered dedicated anti-armor forces with military-grade equipment, proper tactical training, and comprehensive understanding of how to kill Leman Russ tanks. Our squadron was ambushed during the initial advance, caught in a kill zone where enemy forces had prepared positions, overlapping fields of fire, and sufficient anti-armor weapons to engage our entire formation simultaneously. The first volley destroyed 3 tanks before we could respond. The second volley damaged 4 more. The third volley hit us, Adamant Defender, taking multiple impacts across the hull and turret, the armor holding but systems failing, mobility reduced, main gun jammed. We were immobilized. Again. But this time there was no recovery coming. The entire squadron was engaged, every tank fighting for survival, no resources available for extracting disabled crews. Lieutenant Cross made the assessment: we're dead if we stay, probably dead if we evacuate, but staying guarantees it. Abandon tank, scatter and evade, make it to friendly lines independently. We evacuated under fire. Cross was killed before he made it 10 meters from the tank anti-personnel fire that caught him in the open. Thane made it to cover but took wounds that would kill him without medical attention he wouldn't receive. Mech and I scattered in different directions, trying to break contact, to escape the kill zone, to survive. I ran through terrain I didn't know, pursued by enemies I couldn't see, armed with only my sidearm and combat knife, wearing armor that was designed for interior tank service and provided minimal protection against small arms fire. I ran until exhaustion forced me to stop, hid in a destroyed building while enemy forces searched the area, remained hidden for 16 hours, listening to gunfire and explosions and screaming, knowing the squadron was being destroyed, knowing my crew was dead, knowing my survival depended on remaining absolutely silent while enemies searched within meters of my position. I was extracted 3 days later by a search and rescue team looking for survivors. They found maybe 30 armored crew members from a squadron that had deployed with over 200. The tanks were all destroyed. Total loss. The operation was classified as catastrophic failure, and the sector was abandoned. I was reassigned. Again. New crew, new tank, new campaign. But I couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't climb back into a crew compartment, couldn't load shells while knowing the tank would eventually be destroyed, couldn't build relationships with crew members I'd watched die. I requested transfer to infantry. The request was denied. Armored crew members were too valuable, too expensively trained, too difficult to replace. I was assigned to another tank with orders to resume my duties. I refused. Refusing orders in the Imperial Guard is serious offense. Court-martial, potential execution, minimum result of penal battalion assignment. I knew the consequences. Didn't care. Couldn't climb back into a tank. Couldn't smell that smell again. Couldn't endure that heat. Couldn't load shells while waiting for the moment when armor failed and everyone died. The regimental commander interviewed me personally. Asked why I was refusing assignment. Asked what had changed. Asked if I understood the consequences. I told him everything. The smell, the heat, the noise, the fear. The crew members I'd watched die. The tanks I'd lost. The accumulated trauma of 3 years in armored service. The nightmares where I was trapped inside burning tanks. Where I was loading shells while the crew compartment filled with fire. Where I died over and over in every way armored crew members die. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Trooper Morth, he finally said, you have 3 options. First, you return to armored service and continue performing your duties. Second, you accept court-martial for refusing orders and face the consequences. Third, you accept medical discharge for psychological unfitness and receive veterans settlement. Medical discharge, early separation, the acknowledgement that I'd been broken by service, that I couldn't continue, that the Imperium was releasing me from obligation. It felt like failure, like I'd survived when better soldiers had died, like I was abandoning the regiment, the armored service, the tanks that still needed crews. But I accepted, took the discharge, left the regiment, settled on an agri world where I'd never see another Leman Russ, never smell promethium fumes, never hear the sound of shells loading into breaches. That was 7 years ago. I still have nightmares. Still wake screaming sometimes, trapped in dreams where I'm inside burning tanks. Still smell promethium when there's none present, a phantom scent that trauma burned into my nervous system. I still see my crew members. Kosef, who died during my 2nd week. Vin, wounded, evacuating from Emperor's retribution, who I heard later died from infection before reaching proper medical care. The crew of Unbreakable Faith, whose names I never learned because they died before we could build relationships. The drowning crew of Righteous Fury. Lieutenant Cross, Corporal Thane, Trooper Mech. They're all dead, all of them. Everyone I served with in armored regiments, dead in their tanks or shortly after, killed by enemy fire or mechanical failure or the accumulated damage that armored service inflicts. And I survived. Broken, traumatized, discharged as psychologically unfit, but alive. The propaganda reels still show gleaming tanks rolling victoriously across conquered worlds, still show armored might and imperial strength and the Emperor's armored fist. They don't show the crew members inside. Don't show us loading shells until we break. Don't show the heat, the smell, the fear. Don't show the death rates, the mechanical failures, the ways armored service destroys the people who perform it. They don't tell you that serving in an armored regiment means living inside a metal coffin, waiting for the moment when enemy fire penetrates or mechanics fail or luck runs out. They don't tell you about the smell that never leaves. Even now, 7 years removed from service, settled on a peaceful agri-world, far from any battlefield, I still smell it. Promethium and death. The smell of armored service. The smell that defined 3 years of my life and will haunt me until I die. That's the brutal reality they don't show in the propaganda reels. That's what serving in an armored regiment actually means. And I survived it. Somehow,